Hello, everyone. I'm going to be telling you about journal articles. So this is mini lesson 1. So why might you write up a scientific experiment? Any thoughts? So you do all of this work, kind of trying to get funding, grant funding to be able to conduct a scientific experiment. And then you get all of the materials that you need, all the people that you need to do it. You go through all the steps, you make sure that it's safe. You have to go through the institutional review board and make sure that they approve of your procedures, that they're ethical procedures, and then you have your results. So why write it up? Well, it's important to write up scientific research because without writing it up, other people won't know what your findings are. And some things that can happen are that when you write a scientific article, which we also call just a journal article, and we call the publications that scientific articles are published in journals, so scientific journals. They have a specific format, specific way of formatting like what you did that we're going to go through, but kind of thinking about like, what's the point overall of doing that? Well, there are other scientists out there trying to do experiments, and maybe they need to build off of what you did. So every time you do an experiment, you realize at the end, oh man, I should have done this differently. Or, oh, now I have all these other questions. Or, oh, if I could have done this again and I had more money, this is how I would do it. Here's what I learned. So because we're a scientific community, so that means we're trying to help each other out, learn from each other. We want to get that knowledge out there so that we know, okay, this is how they did it. So that means I can go one step further, or they made this mistake. Let me not make that mistake again and learn from that. Because we're all making mistakes in science all the time, but that's kind of the way that we learn. And sometimes it gets in the news like, oh, this study found this and that study was wrong. And as long as you're doing it ethically, then other people can learn from you. And as long as you're being transparent, transparent means see-through, right? So your research needs to be see-through so that someone else could see what you did. And then the second reason is for people who are actually going to use your science to make a change in life. Okay, so we know from the COVID pandemic that there were a lot of changes that we made based on what we were learning from science. Oh, okay, these masks work, these masks don't work, staying this far apart versus that far apart, the vaccines, there's a lot of information we were getting. It needs to get somewhere in a journal article. And so this is an example of a journal article that our team wrote about studying SOVA intervention in primary care. And so you can see that there is this abstract. So I'm going to go through the different sections of a journal article, and then I'm going to show you this one so that you can kind of see. But the abstract is basically like a short summary of what the article is about. It takes a long time to read through articles, and so you want this like snapshot that you can get just so you know like the main gist of the article. And then if you want to read more, you can spend time doing that. But that's why these abstracts help you. And usually abstracts anybody can read, but the full article, sometimes people have to subscribe to the journal or pay for it to be able to get the materials. I'm going to show you one website, so called PubMed. And so any study that the federal government pays for, so gives grant funding to, there is a law where after a certain amount of time, so the journal has maybe like a year or something where they can kind of make money off of having this available and subscription only and whatever. But then because the federal government paid for it, you also have to put that article on their website. And then from there, anybody can read it. How do people pay for journals? Well, you could pay as an individual, but many universities have subscriptions. So for example, at the University of Pittsburgh, because I work there and students who go there, they can access those articles through the library. And they can access it like online through the library. But other people in other countries, especially in lower income countries or middle income countries, they might not have access to all of those journals. And so it's important that PubMed exists. Okay, and then how do we keep up with all of these journals? There's so much information constantly being published. And so some ways are that people will belong to professional organizations. So that means for me, I'm a pediatrician, and there is the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they are an organization that basically does a lot of work on behalf of pediatricians. For example, they go to the government and they say, hey, you know, there really should be laws to protect children from guns. And there's too many guns everywhere that are really hurting children. And so it's sometimes policy changes that need to change to improve health. But another thing they do is, for example, get information out to us from articles. So they'll read through the article, summarize them, and then send us like sleeping 10 hours per night, linked to kindergarten success. So it's important for little kids to get enough sleep. Okay, so the basic format of a journal article is that there is background, methods, results, and a conclusion. So we're going to go through those. Okay, so background is really the why. So basically, when you're writing an article, you have this first section, and it's kind of like the introduction. And always in science, you don't want to be wasting your time. Like if something has been done 3,000 times, why are you doing it again? That's like wasting money, wasting time, wasting resources. And there's limited resources, and we need science to kind of move so we can get new information. And so the background is basically a summary of that. And it's important that whoever's doing the science knows the science before them, kind of like knowing your ancestry, knowing history. So you need to know what other people did so that you can be efficient, and you can be smart when you're thinking about your science. Like, okay, if this study found that, this might not work in a certain way, I need to take that into account. So you basically need to show, okay, here's the summary of what's been done. And also sometimes when you're a scientist, you are really a super expert on what you're doing, but you don't know what other people are doing. But it's good for you to learn. So you might read another article and you're like, oh, I wonder what's already been done there, or what kind of the whole story is with this issue. Then that's the point of that background, is to kind of get you to the point where the scientist is. Like, here's what's been done, here's why we're here. And then you say, why am I doing what I'm doing? So you probably heard about scientific hypothesis. That means it's like your educated guess, but you're educated based on the science that was done before you. That's why it's educated. And then you want to say, I'm doing this study because blah. Okay. Then in the methods, this is a whole kind of instruction section basically, but it's showing what your instructions were for how did you go about doing this study. Like, what are the literal steps that you took? And the point is that science needs to be replicable. So sometimes someone might find out something and then someone else does it and they're like, that's not actually what's going on. example might be like there were studies showing that, you know, coffee is associated with problems with heart disease, but it wasn't the coffee. It was actually that coffee drinkers were more likely to smoke, and it was the cigarettes that were associated with heart disease. So you need to like repeat studies multiple times to kind of like figure out what's actually going on. And so you want to have it so that someone could take your study, a different scientific group, and do the same kind of instructions, directions, and then they should be able to get like a similar result. Or if they get something different, that's adding to the information of like, well, why was it different? Okay. And then you did all this work. Results are, what did you find? Okay, and there's specific ways of presenting results. You can use tables, which are visually sometimes easier to look at, figures like charts, graphs, and then you can just write up your results. And so there are all kinds of different methods that can be used to get information for research. And based on what you use, you write up the results. So sometimes we're just collecting numbers and writing up those results. Sometimes we're collecting like words, interview information. That's what we're talking about in our study. Sometimes you could be summarizing information. So there's a lot of different ways you can show results. And then once you're done with all of that, your discussion is the so what. Like, why am I doing this? Like, what did this kind of have us learn from everything that all of our results? Did we answer our question in the beginning, like the hypothesis, the kind of our educated guess, where we write about our educated guess? If we weren't right, what else did we learn? And then now what? Meaning, okay, this is what we found. What's the next step? And that's what I was talking about earlier when you're reading the articles that have been done and putting it in a journal. It's your chance to say, hey, this is what we learned, and we think that the laws should change to, you know, protect kids from guns. That could be a study, and that has been studies. Or we think that doctors should start using this medication instead of that medication. There's lots of ways science can say now what. And it's pretty cool as a scientist to be able to say now what. Like, hey guys, this is what I learned. You gave me your money, I spent it, and this is what I learned. Now I think you should do this. And what's neat is I went to a conference at Society for Adolescent Health and Medicine, which is a big adolescent medicine group that meets in America every year, different places for a conference, and a bunch of people like me all over the US and some international. And so I had an international colleague who was in, I think she's in Netherlands, and she told me that they, in her group, read an article I wrote. And that article I wrote was interviewing teens who were depressed about how they use social media. And she was like, oh yeah, that was really interesting for us. And so it's really cool that like they learned about my article, but then also that like these Pittsburgh teens, what they thought was being heard all the way in the Netherlands. So it's pretty powerful stuff. Okay, I wanted to go through 2 search tips with you, but first I wanted to go through this article. So hopefully you can still see my screen. Okay, so this is the article I was showing you in the beginning, and it was published in the Journal of Clinical Psychology in Medical Settings. And this is basically the title of the article. Here are the authors, and this is the abstract. So this is like the summary of the article. And then we go to the next page, which is the background. So in the background, I'm saying, first thing, depression in adolescence is associated with substance use, decreased academic and social functioning, and suicidal ideation and behaviors. And here are all of the different scientists, different groups that have written about this. Okay, and so you're kind of saying, and so you're saying like, okay, here's kind of what we learned. Here's what some of the stuff we did before, and then here's kind of some ways other people have looked at these things. And then at the end, the very last sentence, we say, we sought to develop and investigate potential implementation strategies, which I'm going to talk to you in a different mini talk, for the introduction of SOVA with the goal of translating to more effective implementation in the future. So basically, we wanted to develop these strategies. Okay, next we go to methods. So methods, first thing is, who did the study, participants, and how did we get them to do the study? Then we say, how did we collect the data? So we did a survey. Here's all the stuff that was in the survey. And we used scales that already exist that other people have developed. And so it's better to use something that's been like thoroughly developed because there's different ways to do measurement. And then we did focus groups and interviews. And then I have a little table of like, okay, we had focus groups at month 1, and here's what we did. Here's what we talked about. Month 2, month 3, month 4, month 9. And so like this shows someone, if they wanted to do it themselves, how they might do it. Okay, and then this goes through, here's how we collected information and how we analyzed it. So I think Nidhi was showing you how to use NVivo. So we used NVivo for coding, and then we use this model to analyze. And then we say, okay, we developed this code book. We used a content analysis approach. So there's different kind of things we did qualitatively to do the study. Okay, so now we get to the results. So we get to the baseline survey, and this is like descriptive statistics. So the total, or the kind of, yeah, total average score on this scale was 2.43 with a standard deviation of 0.94. So you see there's like all these numbers here, and we're reporting those. But then we're also reporting what we learned in the focus groups. And what's neat is in these qualitative studies, we can include direct quotes from people. So this person says, you know, the website is a fantastic idea for kids on the fence or parents on the fence, or where the kid doesn't want the parent to know what's going on with them fully. And so I basically say here, here's my finding. SOVA had intuitive appeal to primary care providers who felt that it has potential to facilitate adolescents and parents in communicating about symptoms and increasing help seeking. And here's a quote that shows the evidence. So I basically like summarized, this is what they said. And so that's kind of how you use the quotes. And so that's more and more of that. And then this is kind of other stuff we did. We proposed this implementation strategy. This was kind of a complicated study, but these are kind of from those interviews. What we learned is how we might get SOVA out to more people. And so this is kind of similar to what we're doing in this study with you all, except that we were doing it with primary care providers instead. And we wanted to know, like, what did they want to kind of get the websites out. And then we showed in this article, so it's cool because like someone else might use this stuff. We showed, hey, these providers wanted physical reminders. So we did these like earbuds, and we did this for the phone, so people could put their like ID card or whatever, or credit card. And then we had brochures, and here we had a poster, and we had a monthly newsletter. Here's what all this stuff looked like. Okay, so then we showed what we did, and then we have the discussion. So we say, okay, you know, here is what we found. First, we found this. Second, we found this. In our survey, we found this. And you're kind of taking it further than the results because you're interpreting it. Like, what does it mean that we found this? Like, despite their interest and readiness, their intentions for utilizing the strategy, did not translate into behavior change in real world scenario. So that's kind of what we found. And then you always put this limitation section where you're like, okay, like this was good, but here's what we wish we could have done differently, or here's what we couldn't do, and kind of what some problems might be because of that. So you have to kind of say like, what could have gone better? And then implications is that last part where I say, you know, here's what we think, what should change, and then conclusion just like summarizes all of that. And then what's cool, for example, is that you can include this appendix. So this appendix has basically my interview guide, like, hello, my name is Anna, and this is my research coordinator, blah, 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 blah. And then like, these are literally how we did the interviews. These are kind of some more tables we made with quotes and stuff. And then, yeah, what's your practice recommending? Do you feel intervention like this is needed? Blah, blah, blah. So someone could literally take this and do it themselves, which is pretty cool for their like intervention. Okay, the last thing I wanted to show you is 2 search tips. So let's say you're like, okay, well, I want to look for an article. So I want to tell you about Google Scholar if you haven't seen it before. Better to use this than like just Wikipedia to figure stuff out. So scholar.google.com. So let's say you want to search anything, and Google Scholar does a pretty good job, but like the more simple you are with your terms. So maybe you're like, are video games bad for teens? You want to say video games, adolescent. Look, then you get all these articles. So it shows you, okay, let me open this one. Okay, and then this article is Game On, Girls Association Between Co-Playing Video Games and Adolescent Behavioral and Family Outcomes. And then it shows you in the abstract, okay, here's why we did the study, here's how we did the study, here's what we found, and then this is the conclusion. This is the first study to show positive associations for co-playing video games between girls and their parents. And they were like, wow, this is really cool. Okay, this was published in Journal of Adolescent Health, August 2011. Well, how can I look at it? You click View PDF, and there it is. That's the article. Okay, so Google Scholar is really nice to use. I can't see because I have this Zoom thing here. Okay, and then the other one I wanted to show you is PubMed. PubMed is the National Library of Medicine. It is 34 million articles from biomedical literature. So basically it summarizes it, I mean, not summarizes, it has all this information that basically the government has funded, all these articles. So let's say you're, and it's harder to search PubMed than it is Google Scholar, because like you have to write things in a certain way. Like it's not as, honestly, it's like smart as Google Scholar to like find things that you're looking for. You have to kind of think through how your search a little bit more, like how you're going to actually type it in here. But let's say, let's type video games, adolescents here. Let's see if we find the same thing. It's probably getting better. Yeah, it doesn't find the same thing, but you can see here, like, okay, the benefits of playing video games, playing violent video games and desensitization to violence. Can active video games improve physical activity? Okay, let's see, screen violence and youth behavior. So here it shows you, oh, the full text is available here at AAP. But here, okay, see this is what I want to show you. So it says, can active video games improve physical activity in adolescents? A review of randomized control trials. So let's say you're like, oh, I want to see this study. I read the abstract, it's pretty cool. And for some reason, like you can't open it in the other journal. When you see this, or it says free full text PMC, that means PubMed Central. And when you click here, then you can click here. It says Pub Reader, which is a little hard to go through, or PDF. If you click here on PDF, then you can get that actual article. Because this has been uploaded, when it says this NCBI, this is the National Library of Medicine. And so they have access to this article. So that's how you can look through journal articles. And thank you for listening. Now I will